Nations are expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. The delegation, which includes South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, is on a peace mission aimed at opening talks between Russia and Ukraine. Joining us now is the Defence and Security Analyst, Professor Michael Clarke. I think 7 nations involved here. What's the point of getting African leaders involved?
Yeah, well, Nick, officially they're there to talk about a peace plan. Everybody has a peace plan who goes to Kiev and then, in this case, Petersburg. What they're really there to talk to Putin about is the grain deal. They're very anxious that this year the grain deal is repeated. So the grain that comes out of Odessa, millions, 40, 50 million tonnes, and other ports like Chernomorsk and Yezhny, these are really important transit routes for the grain. Last year, it created a real crisis in world food, price crisis, supply crisis. They don't want that to happen again, and the grain deal is due to run out fairly soon. So I think they'll be leaning on President Putin to repeat the grain deal again as it runs out. He will probably say yes, even though he's got reasons not to, but he'll probably say yes because of the interests of Russia, the wider interest in Africa. Russia is making a big play for support from Africa for its interpretation of the war, and they've got quite a lot to do in Libya. They're involved in the Libyan civil war. They're involved in the civil war in Sudan. They've got big interest in the Central African Republic, diamond-rich Central African Republic. The Wagner Group have already got 1,500 troops there, and the Central African Republic are offering the Russians a big, normal military base. So there's a lot going on in this part of Africa, and President Putin is playing for that, as well as the broader sympathy of the African nations.
Oh, very interesting. Now, the counter-offensive has been on around 2 weeks now. Where are we with that?
Yeah, we're coming up to 2 weeks, 2 weeks tomorrow. And you can see there's activity all along the front. So Crimea, north and south of Bakhmut, at Marinka, Avdiivka and Vuhledar. The Ukrainians are pushing quite hard at Vuhledar. But if we actually look a bit more closely at the broader map, you can see there's 3 areas here. So there's that Bakhmut area that we were just looking at. There's Velika Novosilka, big push there, and this very interesting one from Orikhiv towards Tokmak. And that looked like the biggest push to start with. Now, that distance doesn't look great, and it isn't, between Orikhiv and Tokmak. But if you were a Ukrainian commander looking at what the Russians have got around Tokmak, which is strategically very important, you know that you've got a really tough nut to crack. And it tells us a little bit about the pros and cons of each side. The Ukrainians have got Western equipment. They've got night fighting equipment, which is very good and very useful, which the Russians basically don't have. And they've got mobility, protecting mobility. But the Russians are pretty good at static defence, and they've done it fairly well. So they keep fairly untrained and raw troops on the front line. They keep their best troops just behind the front line, and then they counterattack. So when they lose areas, which they have done all the way along the front, they counterattack to get them back. Then the big troops move out again, put the less experienced troops back in the front line. So they're rotating good and less good troops. Their air power is quite good. They're very active in air power. Their electronic warfare is quite good. So they're beginning now to frustrate some of the systems that the Ukrainians have got from us, and there's a constant war going on there. So the Russians are not cracking by any means. They're putting up a competent defence. What the Ukrainians will be trying to do as they feel out this front is unbalance the Russians and see if they can still be competent when they unbalance them. That hasn't happened yet. The Ukrainians are holding most of their forces back, and they'll continue to hold them back until they feel that there's some breakthroughs here, but not so far after 2 weeks.
Nuclear warheads, suggestion they have gone to Belarus. We know that they're allies, aren't they, Putin and Lukashenko? So what's happening there?
Well, yeah, you know, if you've got something to announce in politics, announce it 4 times. That's what they've done. It was first announced on the 25th of March, and it was announced again on the 25th of May. Then it was announced again 2 weeks ago, and now it's here again. So it's the 4th time they've said it, and they're doing it. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I mean, what the Russians are doing is putting some of their nuclear launchers in Belarus next door. But they are, and they will put the weapons in as well, they say, but they will stay in control of them. So they're not giving control of the weapons to Belarus. That would be a very foolish thing to do, and it would be illegal in terms of the non-proliferation treaty, if that matters these days to the Russians. So they won't do that, I'm pretty sure. But the launchers are in Belarus. Lukashenko talks as if he will have some control over them, but he won't. And so this is all part of Putin's bluff, that somehow the nuclear tension is rising. And he's the only one who's making nuclear tension rise. The West doesn't talk about nuclear weapons. The West has stood down a whole series of nuclear exercises so as not to exacerbate the situation. And while the West has been doing that, the Russians have been increasing their nuclear exercises to frighten everybody.